To the final live on LinkedIn session for World Tutors Day. We have my very old friend, Rachel Vecht. We grew up together and actually went to school together. And here she is talking to us about parenting. Rachel, you're also a former teacher, which has been a pattern with all of the professionals that we've been speaking with today, but you've really dug into supporting parents. And I think that's going to be what we explore today. You also generously provided a presentation for World Tutors Day, which was a real focus on keeping students, young people, children motivated. Now, I think what always occurs to me is these truths of parenting are so intuitive, but they need to be said again and again. And I hope that what we do together is unpack all of that and how parents and tutors can support young people to have the most, the best start in life, the healthiest start in life. But before we dive into any of that, we need to hear about your journey, which I know you do explore in the CPD, which Odette will put the link to in just a second. But if you could just give us a sense of what you do today in Educating Matters and how you got here, that would be awesome.
Okay, so I'll maybe start at the beginning. When you ask little children what they want to be when they grow up. So I always said a mummy and a teacher, and I never really changed my mind about that. So I was always kind of on track to be a school teacher. And I did that as soon as I graduated from university. But I realized very quickly that most of the learning was happening outside the classroom. And I just very naturally, even in my first year of teaching, when some of the parents took one look at me and were like, "Oh, is she qualified to be able to teach my kids?" Because I looked about 16. I found myself kind of really thinking, do we as teachers use parents enough as a resource? Do we kind of share with them our approach in the classroom so they can really reinforce that and get the best out of their kids outside of school? So even as a teacher, I found myself working a lot with parents, running curriculum meetings, giving a lot of guidance and advice. And the other thing I realized that it didn't matter, I was a primary school teacher, it didn't really matter what I was teaching. The most, in terms of content, the most important thing to get right was children's kind of attitude, having like strong self-esteem, and I guess like a growth mindset, even before I knew what a growth mindset was. So 23 years ago, when my eldest child was born, I now have four, I was heavily pregnant and I gave a talk. I was literacy coordinator, and in the 90s, I introduced the literacy strategy to like the whole borough I was working with. And again, people who've been teaching for 30 years was like, who is this person telling us how to now teach reading? I was just transferring what the government was suggesting. I did a talk on how children learn to read and the role parents play. And basically an investment banker heard me speak and said, will you come into my office one lunchtime, give this talk to some of my colleagues? And that's really where Educating Matters was born. And I realized that going to people at work when they're really busy was like a captive audience over lunchtime. So it was driven by two things. One, I wanted more autonomy and flexibility to be able to work, although I loved teaching, to be able to work in a way that enabled me to kind of be around for my kids. But also, I actually felt I could have a bigger impact on the lives of children through working with parents than having 30 kids in a class or, being deputy head or head of a whole school. So that's kind of a long answer to how I ended up. It just really evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those of us who have been listening throughout this day, the journey is the same. The direction is different depending on what it is that's really motivating us, what our why is. And you saw that niche of parents, and you found a way to amplify your reach.
Yeah.
But that context of going into the corporate world becomes really interesting, doesn't it? Because those are people who are very successful, very focused, very able. How did you find discussing parenting and child development with them?
Well, I'll give you an example from today. So at 12 o'clock today, coincidentally, I did a talk for a law firm on the topic of motivation, which is the exact same topic that I did pre-recorded that session for you. Now, it was a much longer version, But the topic was how to talk so kids or anyone else will listen. And there are so many parallels. Oh, there you go. There are so many parallels between everything I teach is really about fundamental communication skills, relationship, connection. So that doesn't matter if you're talking about the relationship between parent and child, teacher and child, tutor and child, colleagues, line manager and kind of, junior graduate, your relationship with your partner, your relationship with your own parent. There are certain kind of fundamental ways in terms of what it means to be human and how to communicate that really cross over everything. And also the concept of family, I've noticed, has really evolved as well. So like, it's not just parents, it's grandparents, it's godparents, it's neighbors, it's aunts, uncles. A lot of children are maybe raised by single parents. There are all sorts of reasons why people have a connection with a child. And what I'm trying to emphasize is that the words that you use are incredibly powerful. And, I do a lot of stuff around leadership training and emotional intelligence. Like my business has expanded into all sorts of areas. But the idea of leadership is even a child in their own way can be a leader. Like a parent is a leader creating kind of their own culture in their home. You don't have to have that as a job title or have 30 years of experience to influence others. So it's kind of making everyone realize, and also for kids, how the words they use can impact other people.
I think that's so, so powerful. And those key words around communication, relationship, and connection are so powerful in the education space and in parenting and in bridging those gaps. And we know that when breakdowns happen in the relationships between the school and the parent, or the parent and the child, there's a massive rift there. And tutors often find themselves in the middle of those spaces and have the opportunity to actually to empathize, and to rehabilitate and to actually build bridges where they may have broken down. We know that with school attendance as low as it is at the moment, we know that children are really struggling to be in school, and many of those children are supported either through alternative provision or through private tuition. They're really supported back into the school environment. So those methods of communication, coaching, building relationship, and actually that role of being the leader and taking the lead and being proactive in that way becomes really, really important. We find in the crash in mental health, there's a real lack of sense of positivity, of positive self-talk, and that sense of autonomy. And I think that a lot of the book that I picked up just now is a book that Rachel and I are both very influenced by, which is Joanne Faber and Julie King's book, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen. And one of the lovely things about it is that it's all illustrated with script. So let me see if I can find you it's got comics all the way through it. And what's lovely about it there, Rachel's actually got
I've got a really old version. This is, yeah. When you say influence, basically I had a really challenging child in my class, like my very first year of teaching. I studied at the Institute of Education. It didn't give me any information on like really how to manage behavior, but they do now, I'm sure. But back then, I had no idea about neurodiversity. Like we weren't really, I'm sure it's completely different 30 years later, but I didn't feel like I really understood behavior. And I know that that's covered now in terms of training teachers. But I was really at a loss, and I literally went to a bookshop and like went to the parenting section and picked up this book.
Well, you picked up the right one, didn't you?
Yeah.
And there's that lovely phrase that we've come across lots of times, which is all behavior is communication. Yeah. So being able to understand what's the communication behind the child's behavior and being able to unpack that for the parent then becomes really interesting. So the session we had before this, a tutor, Emma Harper, was talking about helping parents to understand that if the child's making progress, it doesn't matter if they're lying down during their session. Yeah. I want to come back full circle to that idea of going into a corporate context, speaking to very successful people and unpacking the basics of positive communication and how to help their child. Surely there's tension there. Surely there's it's difficult to ask them to open their ears, or do you find that they're so eager to learn that they stay curious?
They really do. I think also the thing I see a lot is that being a parent is the greatest leveler.
Yes.
So one of my favorite things about doing this work, so I could go to a car company and you've got the guys like literally in their overalls who are coming in from the factory. And then you've got like someone that's working in like the cafe or whatever, providing lunch. And then you've got like the most senior, the person running the entire company, same in a law firm, it doesn't matter where it is. It doesn't matter what they're being paid, what level they are in the business. If you're a parent, it is like just a great way to really connect with other people in the organization. And a lot of the work that I do is just really normalizing common challenges and providing that space for people to be really open about the challenge of having those caring responsibilities, and just like realizing you're not alone. Because also a lot of these parents in very kind of intense jobs working full time, they don't necessarily have that networking community outside with other parents. They maybe not be at the school gates picking up their kids from school. They've lost they don't even know, like, actually most kids of that age do this, that, or the other. And having that space to also speak with colleagues and understand the culture of like having that full-time job and trying to raise children is really helpful. So look, I find them very, very open to learning, and again transferring it to like, oh yes, this is a much better way to give an appraisal or get the best out of someone in my team. Because so like we said, it's all relationship, there's so many transferable skills.
Isn't that lovely, though, the idea that it's a great leveler and that you can have all those different hierarchies just be, straightened out by that sort of, those instincts for parenting, or the lack of instincts, or the feeling of, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And parents think that they're supposed to know all the answers.
Yeah.
And that point about knowing where other children are up to becomes really interesting. So, if you're raising your child without community and without context, it becomes really, really difficult. And just simply opening the conversation then becomes a massive help. We certainly find that with tutors, that they're working out of context, they're working in isolation. And the minute they see that other people are going through the same challenges, everything becomes destigmatized and much, much less tense.
Yeah.
Which of course has a positive influence on the child. So can we, if it's all right with you, can we dig into the tutoring context? Did you do any tutoring?
I did. When I tutored quite a bit when my first child was born, because it's just a great way to kind of still have a connection with children. But then I got to the point where doing it at the time of day when my kids had, because I used to do it from home, they just come home from school, they'd be like a bit upset that I was with someone else's child. So it got to the point. But yeah, I did quite a lot of tutoring back in the day.
I think many of us have got to that moment where it's antisocial hours, and then lots of tutors that I know are working online internationally for that reason.
Yeah.
And what then becomes really interesting is, again, bridging cultures, and finding effective ways to communicate. So let's dig into the motivating students in the context of tutoring, or as a parent. What guidance, what does success look like over there?
I think that it's very much like you're talking about, like that positive or negative cycle. It's just being in that mindset that I'm going to try and focus on what the child is doing well rather than telling them what they're doing wrong.
Nice.
And there's often like this communication gap between when you say something, even as a tutor, I mean, forget about parents, that's like another relationship, but as a tutor, you're saying something because you think it's my job to to teach and improve and guide and all the rest of it. But being conscious that what you're saying can be heard very differently, from the child. And I think encouraging them to always, like, if you're, I don't know, if you're looking at a piece of work, for example, I don't know, a story or something, to ask them first,
Nice.
how can they what do they think about their work, or what have they done well, what do they think they could try and improve on, and getting the child to try and learn to kind of feedback on their own things first.
That's
um,
lovely. And you use that
and then
example.
inviting, and then giving your perspective.
You use that example in your presentation, don't you?
Right? I forgot.
I think so, because it's so true that certainly teachers' children get shown the punctuation that they've missed
Oh yeah.
before they hear any sort of well done. And Jacqueline McGill, who is a children's coach that we spoke with earlier today, said that children are great observers but not great interpreters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So they don't necessarily understand the implication behind what you're saying, and you have to be really intentional about that language. So
Yeah.
you're saying that one strategy in feedback is asking them first to have a look at their own work and give themselves feedback.
Yeah, you could just say, okay, it's great. I'm having a look at these whatever maths questions, or what did you find difficult? What did you find easy? Which bit do you think you did really well? What are you proud of? And just getting them to start that conversation first before you kind of dive in with your thoughts. And you don't have to. I remember, so I used to say, I've done a lot of sessions for parents on homework and navigating that. And I said to parents, like, it's the job of a teacher or a tutor to give the feedback. You don't know what the focus or the learning objective of that piece of work was. So if you pull the entire thing apart,
Nice.
but actually it's like, can this child structure a story with the beginning, middle, and end? Maybe they've done that brilliantly, but they've been so focused on that, like the grammar and the spelling went out the window. So it's like you can't cover everything at once. And trying to like let a child know, on this particular task, this is specifically like what we're working on.
Yeah, that's a lovely
Build it
example.
up.
It's come out a few times today in the chat and LinkedIn as well, that helping parents understand what the objective is, or which things are bigger and need to be unpacked, and which things are irrelevant and can be glossed over, and picking your battles then becomes really part of the thing that we can we can help with, not because we know better, but because we've got a bit of distance.
Yeah.
And your idea of talking about a family of around the child as being much wider than the parents and the child and the siblings, the nucleus of the family, becomes really interesting. I think there's one more thing that I want to talk about with you, Rachel, and that is alignment. So the educational alignment between the parent, the tutor, the school, and the needs of the child, and getting that right.
Yeah, that is just so fundamental. So when I was doing this talk earlier today, one of the parents said, I really like this approach that you're suggesting, but what happens if the school are not on board? What happens, I feel like the school are too focused on results and not so much like the journey to get there, or the strategies that my child is using. And how do I kind of approach that? Or if, it's the same thing if you are two people are parenting a child and one's got a different approach to the other. I always think the best way to really like influence someone and get them on board is just to kind of not say you're doing it wrong, but like I found, or a tutor can do this, like I found that your child is really responsive with this approach, or this worked really well. I just wanted to share that with you in case you want to, do the same, because it very often happens where you've got a different approach, but if you've discovered something that your child responds really well to just kind of, so I'm wondering if this would help, or I just wanted to share with you X, Y, and Z. And then the person's much more open to listening rather than thinking you're telling them how to do their job.
Yeah, I mean, that it's really tricky, isn't it? And as a parent speaking to the school, you're always you have to approach with such humility, don't you? And
Yeah.
but also empathy. You have to realize how full the teacher's plate is, and that they are acting, they're doing their best.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But again, if you have a parent who is sending to a school that is more outcomes focused than the parent would like, do you suggest that the parent moves the child? Do you suggest that the parent supplements? What would you suggest?
I mean, I do, and again, going back to the beginning, why I work with parents is I used to have this at the bottom of every email, but I said parents are a child's first and most important teacher.
Nice.
They are probably going to learn more from their parents than anyone else. And they go through school with lots of different teachers, lots of different styles and approaches, and they'll just take bits and pieces from various places and adapt. So sometimes it's just kind of, again, it's all about personalities and relationships. I've seen the same, you know, using tutors for my own children. If someone's like, you've got to get this tutor, she's amazing, but my child doesn't, like, I've even had one maths tutor that one child adored and thought was amazing, but then his sister was like, I can't, you know,
Yeah.
it's so, everything is about that relationship and connection, and that's why it's so important to kind of nurture that first before any learning can happen. Like you have to really understand each other and how each other ticks, and we're all human and individual and have a difference, so it's kind of playing around with that and seeing what lands well for that individual, and it's not going to be the same for another child, which is,
That's been a,
yeah, tutors can do that because it's
yeah.
one-on, you know, it's one-on-one, they've got the time to invest.
And the parent can do that. The parent can say, this is not the right maths tutor for this second child. I will find someone else, or I will find some pre-recordings, you know, some content that is a better match than the one-to-one context, or a group, or in person rather than online. There are so many ways for us to vary the delivery to achieve the same outcomes or better outcomes. And I think that that's one of the threads that we've been touching on today, is that many of us who have left the classroom have found our own way to deliver our own specialism, which is perfectly suited to a special group of children, and that each one, you know, we're moving away from this one size fits none model, and reaching this really rich, varied space.
Mm-hmm.
But the challenge, of course, is to give parents the confidence to say, I'm going to try something different. You know, I don't have to do it the same way that my neighbors did it, or my older sister did it, or the teacher recommends. There are other ways.
Yeah, I always say to parents, like, you are the expert on your own
Nice.
child, more
Yeah.
than, you know, any kind of, I don't know, psychologist or teacher or me or whoever.
And then teaching the parent to advocate for the child, and then teaching the child to advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
And that's when it becomes really interesting. So I feel like we've covered so much ground here, but you've got a ton of resources that are available to tutors and parents, and many of us listening are both tutors and parents. So do you want to explain what's on offer at Educating Matters? And I think you've got a special offer for us as well.
Yeah, so I'm not great at social media other than LinkedIn. So you will find me there most days talking about something relating to parents or my own experiences with my kids as I go through that journey. On my website, there is a blog section with lots of different categories of topics. I have a newsletter. I have an online parenting course. So for many years, about 16 years, I used to run a group parenting course, and then through COVID, it went online, like remote. And then there's an online version, so you can literally tap in and out when you want. But it's a lot. I do quite a bit of teacher training as well. So again, whether it's in the classroom setting, at home, or the workplace, there are those kind of common themes.
And the common themes is about communication and
Yeah,
positive approaches.
it's basically everything, whatever I'm talking about, it comes back to building relationship and connection.
I think that's so healthy. Thank you so much for participating in World Tutors Day. Thank you for contributing your session to the World Tutors Day free CPD pack. If anybody wants to get in touch with Rachel, find her on LinkedIn. She's there. And Odette and I are really pleased to have your participation in Qualified Tutor and Love Tutoring. What's that? And your support. So she's nodding in the background. So this is the last session for World Tutors Day. It's been amazing to explore this journey of teachers who are leaving the classroom and finding other ways to be educators and to contribute to the change that needs to happen in education. If you want to get in touch with me or Odette or become a member of Qualified Tutor, please go to the qualifiedtutor.org website. Thanks again for your time, Rachel. Thanks everyone on LinkedIn. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye. Happy World Tutors Day.